You just heard Demanufacture from Fear Factory. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I am Jason. And yeah, here we are. A place I don't know if I ever thought I could get us to. Which is the record we're going to be looking at tonight from kind of a, I guess I'd say, not a controversial band, but maybe controversial in terms of like people, you know, in Mark and I's, I guess, camps of metal. Because Fear Factory's probably done more bad than they have done good. They started strong, and then, like many
divisive,
bands
yeah.
in the 90s, they kind of strayed into a new metal-ish, Digimortal, yeah. You know, they had a strong start, and then kind of lost the path. They've since kind of gotten back to, I guess, a little bit of a better place. But we're going to be focusing on kind of a recent Hall of Fame entry, which I was pretty excited to see that Nick Green put that into the Hall of Fame. Because I've always been a big, staunch defender of this record, whereas Mark and Chris, who are a little bit older than me, have not seen it, I guess, as kindly or as maybe as influential as maybe somebody like myself and my buddy Grindcore Coon, who's done a couple of podcasts with us, who's a little bit younger. So
I'm not saying it's not influential.
Okay.
I'm just saying that I don't like it.
Okay. All right. So I go ahead and I guess I'll hear your. Let's get your point of view on some of this, and I'll kind of jump.
My history with Fear Factory goes back to Soul of New Machine when we first heard that.
Yep.
And it was like, okay, that's something kind of, you know, something interesting, because at the time, God, what year was that? Was that 90?
92, I think, Soul in the Machine. Yeah.
Because, like, Pitch Shifter, Godflesh, handful of other bands like that, they were doing the heavy industrial death metal kind of thing, which, I still like some of that, but I think it's a really limited, which, you know, Fear Factory, I guess, kind of saw that early on and kind of branched out a little bit.
Sure.
I don't know if you can make a career out of it. Like, Ministry did some really good records, but then they did more bad records than they did good records.
Sure.
It just seems like...
I think heroin had a lot to do with some of that, too, though, unfortunately.
Lots of Jack Daniels, but also had made some really good music.
That's true,
along the way. But the whole industrial thing, as much as I think it was like something new to add to death metal, almost kind of, I think, pushed them in a corner with really what they could do with it.
Yeah, it was tough.
Because, I mean, they, like, with the riffing and stuff on here, you definitely hear, like, some, like, what, like, Meshuggah would pick up on later on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of bands took their cue from some of this.
And a lot of that just, it doesn't register with me as, it doesn't.
Well, you and I have never really been that big on a band like Meshuggah, where it's like some people, like, kind of lose their shit over Meshuggah, which is, I get, musically, I think they're really talented. I think
they're interesting. I just don't care I don't, Jeff Wagner said it the best, I don't know how to like it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. I use that quote a lot, so props to you, Jeff, if you're listening. You've taught me well in that department, and I could definitely see that, because I think this is very much a record of its time in the development of coming up through the metal ranks, like I did. I remember buying this record at that record store in Mount Pleasant that was not Warehouse Records or New Moon, but it was downtown by the Ward, and it was exclusively metal oriented.
Oh, that lasted for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was not there very long. It's actually where I bought Carcass Heartwork, and where I bought
they had some good stuff there.
Slaughter of the Soul, and I bought this record there. It was like, you could almost call it was like a Roadrunner kind of, like, it was very much a 1995, 1994 Roadrunner type place, like Roadrunner Records.
Well, and also all the, like, the Earache Columbia stuff was
getting huge at
there.
that time. Yeah,
lots of T-shirts, tons of the most Cathedral shirts I've ever seen in my life. There,
I bought a Cathedral shirt there actually, which is cool.
Yeah, I don't remember what that place was called, but that was an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, it was like a weird little moment where metal had this like bubble where it was almost going to be big, but then the Columbia thing kind of failed, and the bubble burst on like a lot of this Roadrunner stuff that like Burn My Eyes, Machine Head, and this Fear Factory record.
Is that when is Burn My Eyes? Is that 95?
94, I want to say. Okay. 94, 95. Yeah, but same era. I mean, I could kind of, and in a way, I almost feel like Demanufacture is like the most Roadrunner-esque of the Roadrunner records of that era. It's like the personification alongside that Burn My Eyes Machine Head record of everything that was that label kind of represented in the early to mid 90s. Once they sort of were done with like the obituaries and some of that like early death metal that they had a part in kind of
Gorguts
and so once they had moved past that and gotten into this next phase, I feel like this is really representative of that, but in a positive way. They obviously had some more negative stuff that kind of came out of this, but
and from a business standpoint, like everybody thought death metal was dead. It was just like this little thing that ran for 5-6 years or whatever, and then we need to find the next extreme,
the next trend or whatever it was going to be. And they picked up on things like this and Bloody Kisses. I think both came out like around the same time as well, like 94, 95. So Roadrunner had like a niche in like trying to find what that next thing was. Typo Negative didn't prove to be it. Fear Factory didn't really prove to be it. Neither did Machine Head. They all three sort of like ran into their own little I guess shortcomings, or if you will. Like you said, you can't make a career out of making this record. This is sort of a one-time deal to make something like this. And in a way, like I take it as, I guess, a singular kind of vision of what it is, which is this sort of concept album that's dystopian, that's about some kind of Terminator-like hunter-killer thing that comes from the future, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like a Queensryche mind crime thing where like it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but you get that there's like this sort of like pastiche, like stitched together kind of thing there, and it gives it sort of an aura where the whole record kind of feels the same, but not in like a bad way, like where it's boring, I guess, from my standpoint. It's this idea that like you can just tell like when a song comes from Demanufacture, I guess, it has that sort of like link between it, kind of like Slaughter of the Soul, which we've talked about before. Every song kind of feels the same on that record and fits together, and that's kind of how Demanufacture kind of works, maybe.
There's just the weird thing of sci-fi lyrics. There's not a ton of bands that do it. Like horror seems to work. It's a more natural fit for extreme music, but then like Nocturnus, The Key, for instance, it's a pretty good record, but if you listen to it, the lyrics, and they have a fairly serious tone, it's kind of stupid. Yeah. I mean, it comes across as kind of foolish unless you're really in that mindset.
I could see that. Yeah.
That's what, like, the that's one thing I liked about death metal is if the lyrics were bad, I didn't know.
Yeah.
But when you're singing, like actually singing, and the lyrics are kind of borderline, like kind of goofy.
And I would say that these guys, because I was looking for that too, because I was like, man, I remember sitting down, like looking at the lyrics and things, and they're not terrible. They're not the greatest. They're not Opeth or Bride or something kind of poetic, but they're definitely not as juvenile as like I maybe thought they might be.
Yeah,
these guys seem to be kind of like fans of like Blade Runner. Like they kind of know their sci-fi enough that they fit some of the dystopian things in there, so that even though you're not necessarily singing along to the songs, because they're not necessarily sing-along songs, that you can pick up on some of like the phrases that they kind of say. And it kind of like it endears you a little bit more to the record. I know what you mean about Nocturnus. There's something about Nocturnus that just doesn't work completely, and maybe we could do a show about that sometimes, because I have no idea how to even approach a band like Nocturnus.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're like such a conundrum to me. Like they exist. They're like linked to Morbid Angel, but yet at the same time, I don't know. But a lot of kind of interesting things going on for this. Colin Richardson did the production, and one of the reasons that they sought him out is they were huge Carcass fans, so they kind of wanted to get some of that same kind of production that Carcass had. Dave McKean, who is a famous comic artist, he did Sandman covers, and he also did some of the early Paradise Lost covers. What else has McKean done? He did like Batman Arkham Asylum. Trying to think of other things that anybody would kind of know.
Did he do the Sandman stuff?
Yeah, he did some Sandman covers and things. He didn't do the inside illustration. He just did a lot of those covers. Yeah,
and did Shades of God for Paradise Lost. Didn't he do As a Flower Withers for?
Yeah, I think he did some Bride stuff. So they saw him out, and they got like kind of this interesting like cover, which I guess represents the kind of dystopian sort of thing where it's like a cyborg's rib cage, and there's an organic side and inorganic side that has the barcode kind of stamped into it and stuff, which is like representing this kind of dichotomy of.
Did you ever look to see if that barcode is the same as the barcode?
I think it is. It's the barcode on the CD, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's the CD barcode, so which is pretty cool. So you could like scan it in and do that whole thing. But so that's what they're kind of operating out of. And one of the things that he does, like Burton C. Bell, the vocalist on this, kind of introduces, I think. I don't know, unless Mark, you can kind of prove me wrong. I think he's one of the first to fully commit to the kind of, kind of clean screamo, clean death metal, sort of back and forth in this sort of capacity.
Yeah, I mean, before that, the only thing I can think that's even close is, like, Celtic Frost with doing, like, the gothy stuff with the more shouty stuff in the same song, but it's not the same type of...
This seems pretty like seamless kind of back and forth, almost like sometimes verse chorus in some of that way, which has become so cliche nowadays. But I guess at the time, I don't really remember as a fan of metal hearing much like this.
I mean, that was even when Soul of a New Machine came out, that was the thing, like, oh, this guy can actually sing. Like, that was kind of a thing. So, yeah, I can't, especially in the extreme metal underground, I can't think of anything.
I mean, I guess you had like Bride or Paradise Lost sometimes, but even like when Paradise Lost was doing it, was more like female vocals mixed with like death vocals. It was the Beauty and the Beast thing,
Yeah, which was only on a couple songs. It wasn't like an entire album.
Sure.
Bride, I guess did it, but it was there's still something different to it because there was so like Aaron from the vocalist from My Dying Bride could only be in that band.
Yes,
he can't be in anything
the romantic overtones of it.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a traditionally good voice. He has a unique character to his voice, but he's not like a great singer. He just sounds tragic when he sings.
Now, do you think that you and Chris probably didn't catch up on this record? Do you think it's because of the era in which it was? Because by 95, you guys had very clearly probably left Roadrunner. What Roadrunner was doing was not really on your guys' radar screen.
From what I can remember, I think Chris might have liked it more than me. I don't remember.
Okay, because I don't remember ever. This is something like I discovered on my own before I ever met you guys.
I remember it being around. It had got a lot of definitely had a lot of like saw it in ads and magazines and kind of talked about, but more talked about in magazines, not by people. Sure. I didn't know a lot of people that cared about it until later on.
And I think it would be my the younger generation, like we all grabbed this record pretty good, kind of like Machine Head Burned My Eyes. That was
it's an accessible record. I mean, it's if you're like getting into extreme music, that's kind of the way to go. If you like, I kind of like death metal vocals, but I'm not sure.
Sure.
I mean, it's like it's kind of it's a gateway. thing for sure.
And what I was saying, like, to me, and this is sort of an interesting, I guess, thesis, if you will, is I kind of see this as the more natural sequel to, like, what KSAD was, like, hinting at, than, say, Roots. Roots was very much a conscious effort by Sepultura to move in a completely different direction with the whole Ross Robinson experiment and things like that.
Yeah.
To me, this and, like, say, Burn My Eyes was, like, what KSAD opened the doors for, in a way. You know, Machine Head and Fear Factory, and like to me it was like linked to that in a way, because some of his gruff vocals were understandable in the way that you could understand kind of what Max was singing sometimes. You know, even with the really terrible Brazilian accent, like, you know, starting to fart, you know, things like
starting
that.
to quake, whatever it was.
But yeah, I hear a lot of that kind of KSED type Sepultura. There's also like an element production wise and through the way in which they like kind of seamlessly put some of the synths and different things in there, that it has like a Bloody Kisses, October Rust kind of feel to it too. And I don't want to say because it's like a vampiric, like gothic kind of thing, but there's this sort of like
kind of washes over
this kind of like tone, especially when we get to the very last track, which I'll talk a little bit more, Therapy of Pain, or For Pain, which kind of closes things down. And then there's also this element of obviously the industrial side, you know, the Godflesh kind of like thing going on, but not so much Street Cleaner Godflesh, which is really your era. It's more like the Selfless kind of era of Godflesh, you know, which was when they signed in Columbia and
the little. I mean, it's more refined. I like the stuff that didn't sound. There's more barbaric, I guess.
Absolutely.
Because I haven't really. The only like electronic stuff I've ever really been drawn to. You know, I like Sisters of Mercy, Fields of Nephilim, Old Ministry.
Yep.
But that was all depressing.
Sure.
Taking something that sounds like that and making it sing about, like, talk about sci-fi, that might be the big disconnect.
Yeah, and that could be, you know,
for me.
And I don't know if I mean, I was initially drawn, I'm not gonna lie, not to like the sci-fi, it was just the sound. I mean, the riffs were very much out of the, you know, this is 95. I was a sophomore in high school. I mean, I was still listening to a lot of Pantera and White
Catchy,
Zombie,
modern.
You know, stuff like that. I was starting to gateway into other things. You know, I think at this point I discovered Earache and was starting to, like, you know, get Morbid Angel and some of the early Earache stuff too. But, yeah, so I think that's where maybe some of that disconnect is from. But I guess I would, you know, urge anybody, if you're in the sort of more of the Mark camp, you know, when you kind of take a listen to this, what I love about it musically is Dino Cesaris has very much a singular vision of like his riffing patterns. It's you know it's a Fear Factory riff from the very beginning. It's a
muted power chord. Yeah,
exactly. And you know, and that's either something you like or don't like. It's almost like Rob Zombie guitar. Like you just kind of know like White Zombie guitar because it just has that sonic kind of quality to it. But I think where like the heroes of this record are Raymond Herrera, which is the drummer. I really like the things he's doing. He's trying to make an inorganic sound organic, and that's kind of the sci-fi thing. I mean, if you again go to the cover, organic, inorganic, and so he's trying to do this very much computerized, almost like electronic drum type sound,
programmed,
but yet none of it's programmed. And so if you ever did think that this was programmed, well, I guess they you know, serve the purpose, like CGI that fools people into believing it's.
Well, because we saw these guys with, God, I think it was Sepultura and Clutch.
Okay, that would make sense in that era.
Or something like 90. It was that before this came out.
Okay, it's like 93.
But seeing Raymond Herrera play drums is pretty interesting. It's a weird, partially electronic kit, but physically played for some of the toms and stuff.
Okay.
But then his kicks were just kick drums.
Gotcha.
Mic'd. And that's basically all you could hear. You couldn't hear anything else.
Yeah. And I've never seen them live. They actually played close to here about a month ago, and I missed them.
Okay.
They were playing at that Novi Dirt Fest or whatever that.
Oh, were they there?
Yeah, they were there until it was down. So a buddy of mine who coaches cross country with me, his band played the same day as Fear Factory. But
a friend of mine who's in Child Bite.
Oh, okay.
Played up there too. He's like, "Oh, the pay whatever guarantee is."
That's exactly. I mean, I would have went just to see Down or Fear Factory, you know, but you know,
just the idea of standing in a parking lot in Birch Run for
it doesn't sound too appealing. If I would have known like what time a certain band was playing,
and Cold Chamber was there.
Oh, how did we miss that?
Yeah.
Damn. we forgot to bring up Cold Chamber on our comeback episode last time. So that's a couple things to kind of think about. Is really pay attention to the drums, I guess, and then again, there's this quality that all the songs kind of fit together in a really cool, seamless sort of way. We're gonna kind of just follow our way through the record. If you're familiar with it, we're going to get into self-biased resistor and zero signal next. And one of the things that's really cool about zero signal, and you kind of heard it on the opening track there, Demanufacture, is the blending of kind of electronics and some of the keyboard stuff. They got some of the guys that were part of like frontline assembly, kind of help them like do some of that, I believe,
to arrange it or something.
Yeah, to get some of the keyboard kind of sounds and things. I remember reading in the Decibel Hall of Fame. I couldn't quite get where they contributed and where they didn't, and I knew they were like a part of the remix record that came out after Soul of a New Machine and stuff. But
was it Remanufacture?
Yes, that came out after this. But there was one that came out with remixes of Soul of a New Machine before this too, and that's where they met the Frontline Assembly guys. And I can't remember off the top of my head which one that was called. I could look it up.
Was that what was it, Concrete or something? The demo?
Concrete was all their old demos. Yeah, that was like their pre-Soul kind of demos, and that's pretty good too. But so you'll hear it very well in Zero Signal. This is a record. It's funny. I don't know if I told you this before, Mark, but like, I used to ski to this record a lot, so that's what I like remember. Because I have
it's like a bizarre thing.
Exactly, I have a ski helmet that has like an iPod plug, and so you can just kind of put that on. It just pipes it into your ski helmet as you're skiing. And just like every time I hear this record, I just picture myself like going down like slopes and like shit. It's so weird. So it's a really.
It seems like you'd really want to.
I'd want
like
Immortal or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, like I think I have listened to Immortal while I'm skiing, just like Mighty
Pure
Mountain
Holocaust
and shit like that. Yeah. So, but yeah, so we're gonna hear self-biased resistor, Zero Signal, and then we'll come out with Replica and New Breed.
I
That was New Breed, Replica, Zero Signal, and then we got things started off with Self-Bias Resistor. And a couple of things about those last two tunes that we heard, and Mark's just sort of been listening to this as we're kind of going along, which is probably different than what we're used to doing. So, feel free to jump in a little bit, but the cool part, I was talking about the keyboards and Zero Signal, this kind of like Terminator keyboard kind of breakdown kind of part in it. But Replica has some really neat stuff going on drum-wise, where there's a lot of parts that work on this record are because of some of the repetition. And when you have something, and maybe you have like a musical term for it, but when you have like something that's very much the same, and then all of a sudden you unravel that sameness, it stands out a lot more than, say, something that's a lot more like proggy, where it's constantly. We just had a little microphone drop. Sorry, got a little overexcited. We all good?
Yeah.
All right. Whoa. And do you want to start over?
No, just keep going.
Okay. There we go. Technical difficulties. Here we are. We're back. But no, one of the things, like when you listen to a band that's a lot more progressive is you have, more, you're kind of preparing more for kind of constant change. And so one of the things that like he does on Replica, and you hear it like a little bit, like in Flashpoint, which we'll get to in this next set, is he's doing like a lot of the same like drum patterns, and then all of a sudden he'll just sort of like go like buck wild, like sort of like crazy over the top, almost like a Mastodon type part, and then he just like pulls it all of a sudden back to that same like riff that he was doing.
It reminds me a lot of like Ministry Thieves.
Okay.
Where it's that consistent through the whole thing until it just, kind of, it's almost like it hits the end of the measure and then it like resets itself and then goes back again or something.
I mean, I guess is that you're a guy in we've always talked about the philosophy of like you, me, and Chris, and how like you and Chris are sometimes kind of like at different extremes in terms of Chris really has a liking for like a lot of complex like variety, like a lot of progressive-y kind of stuff, and you're
well-produced things.
Yeah, and you kind of appreciate the idea of sort of like the simplicity riff and things like that. Mm-hmm. So like, what they're doing where it's like they're almost trying to do like this inorganic, almost like programmed drum sound.
Yeah.
Does that like appeal to you in any kind of way, in that like they're doing that as a repetition and then they break away from the repetition? Does that like work? Or, because that seems like that's more like in line with like a philosophy that you would have with like music, where like just kind of like jam on that same riff and then all of a sudden do like a little pinch harmonic just out of nowhere. That's like
there's a concept, yeah, but not always as songs with these guys, just because it's
sure,
it's a taste. It comes down to a taste thing.
Yeah, but, an aesthetic kind of thing, which I get.
But I mean, Neurosis does a similar kind of thing to where they play on a riff and they don't give you the hook,
and then there's a release moment almost.
Sometimes,
yeah, sometimes
like I just saw them recently. They're like kind of doing all the hits, and when you hear like Locust Star, which is like their only single I guess they ever did,
there is definitely a release moment in that song that's pronounced.
But there's a lot of stuff later on where it's just kind of builds and builds and builds and doesn't pay off. It's just like they leave you hanging a lot.
Sure,
which I'm sure is all intentional.
Well, now we get to the sort of the part of the record where they, as you sort of said, they started to get a little bit more metallic at this point, right?
The riffs almost sound like later on Napalm.
Yeah, some thrashy stuff, kind of like stuff.
Forget what was the one that sounded like just like an Exodus riff.
Oh, Body Hammer. Yeah, Body Hammer just kind of starts right off with a kind of a riffing type thing. But one of the cool parts is that they open up with is they do Dog Day Sunrise, which I didn't know when I first bought this record, because I wasn't smart enough to really like investigate the booklet that much, that it was a cover. It was a Head of David cover, which is Justin Broderick's band after Napalm, correct? Pre-Godflesh.
Well, he was
starting. Oh, he was in it. He was drumming for them.
Yeah, he was asked to drum for them.
Okay, after he quit Napalm, before he started Godflesh?
Yep.
Is that the timetable?
Yeah.
All right. And you can kind of tell right away that it sounds different, but at the time I just thought, oh, they're just doing this weird song in the middle of this record, kind of like for years I didn't know on South of Heaven that Distant Aggressor was a Judas Priest cover.
I
just thought it was a strange Slayer song.
Yeah, or it sounds so much like a Slayer song.
Yeah. So Dog Day Sunrise kind of, again, it starts off, it has that sort of Godfleshy kind of feel to it that you would expect from anything that's associated with Justin Broderick,
Yeah.
And then you get into Body Hammer, which again is this song that's it's kind of a cheesy lyrical song. I was sort of like joking about that and Hunter Killer both have like lyrics like "I'm your judge and your jury." You don't get like there is
they're rhyming attorney with
yes.
What was it with jury?
Jury, yes, yeah. It's a stretch at times. It's a stretch at times for sure.
Get a thesaurus dictionary, I guess.
I think one of the problems you get, and maybe I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but when you are trying to do a concept record, do you think that concept albums inherently destroy some of the lyrical composition of a record because you're trying to fit round pegs in kind of a square hole?
Unless you're like Neil Peart or like Rush does it really well.
Yeah,
like they have really good lyrics no matter if you like their music or not. But it seems like it would be more confining. I would think it'd be much more challenging to try to take that concept through unless you had it really figured out beforehand. But most concept records, when I hear that, I'm just like eye roll, and it's usually not it's not that interesting of a thing to spend an entire record on.
Sure.
To me, but
and I think the thing that maybe works, and you can weigh in on this, is it's a concept record in that it has a singular vision, I think, of what they're trying to do. But I don't feel like you have to really know what the hell's going on to like listen to the record or to like give a shit about the record, because partially it's a death metal vocal record, so you're not going to really understand the lyrics completely. But like whereas Queensryche Operation Mindcrime, like the first few times like you listen to it, and it's a great record, no one would deny that, but you feel sort of pigeonholed, or like you have to like figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
When you get to certain songs like Sweet Sister Mary or whatever, you're like, okay, what the fuck is the story? Like, there's rain, they're like fighting with a nun. I don't quite
The stories are long and complex and often not
or not really worth the effort that it takes to understand what the plot is or whatever.
Which I see with a lot of theater.
Yeah.
Like a lot of plays are just, especially older, like I don't really know much about contemporary theater at all, but like seeing stuff in the 70s and 80s, like as a little kid and into the 80s, everything was just really drawn out, like way too much, like stupid. That's always been an issue of mine with musicals, is that why do you need to sing this part? It doesn't necessarily make sense.
Sure.
Like this is a really, really stupid lyric and not a huge moment in the movie to where it merits this kind of attention.
Sure.
To it.
It's like a disconnect.
Yeah, it's just weird to me.
Like it works for me when you can throw like a Bubsy Birksey like dance routine in, like they do in Lebowski with the porno dream sequence, or the KKK and like Oh Brother Where Art Thou.
Oh yeah.
Where you have like synchronized dancing kind of alongside of it, but if it's just
that
like
works in the concept of the thing too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you just have people that just bust in a song for the shits and giggles,
and if the whole movie is that way, like where's the impactful moments?
Yeah,
because most of the time those people can't even sing very well.
I agree. I've had some. I'm definitely not a huge fan of musicals.
I mean, there's some good ones for sure. One not to go off track too much.
Yeah, I like it.
Have you ever seen Jersey Boys?
I haven't yet.
About Frankie Valli,
but I know the Clint Eastwood movie.
I like Frankie Valli as a singer.
Sure.
I think he's interesting. I liked him as a kid. This guy that's playing him sounds fucking terrible.
Yeah, I didn't seem interested.
He was he's the one that played him on Broadway, so I was like, okay, I can give it a little bit more, because a lot of Broadway singers aren't. There's Broadway singing, and then there's singing for, recording or whatever. And the guy does not hit. He doesn't have any of the character in his voice like Frankie Valli had at all.
Yeah.
And it just completely took me out of the picture. I don't even know what this has to do with Fear Factor.
Hey, we were talking about conceptual singing or conceptual lyrical kind of stuff. But like when you get to songs like Body Hammer, HK, Hunter Killer, the music in them outweighs anything else. And I think that's like the thing. Like, if you're listening to a record like this, there are some cool like technology type vibes and industrial sort of moments with the keyboards and samples and things like that give it a futuristic kind of sound. I guess that's the only way of like sort of putting it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily something that's like essential to like understanding or enjoying the sound of the record, like I said, the stuff that they do, like drumming wise, is really where like this is like key. And when you get to like a song that we're going to end the set with, which is Piss Christ very much has like a kind of like a nail bomb, like clenched fist Sepultura sort of feel. Like there's definitely Max Cavalera like blood kind of like all over this. And in fact, you pointed out, I think it might have even been in Flashpoint, there was like some cool bass breakdowns or whatever, and it sounded straight off of like Nail Bomb Point Blank, which is funny because
and it's out of on the record. It's almost out of place.
Yeah,
because the bass doesn't come to the surface that much.
Yeah, exactly. And so And I guess that's interesting. It stands out. It's like I said when we were talking about doing things that are repetitious and then doing something a little bit different to like kind of make it sort of jump out a little bit at you. You know? So. But yeah, so this is we're gonna get into Dog Day Sunrise, the Head of David cover. Then we got Body Hammer on the way, Flashpoint, HK, Hunter Killer, which Hunter Killer and Body Hammer were my two favorite songs when I was a kid, and now I look at them and they're probably two of the more, I guess, lyrically juvenile songs. But
Body Hammer, it sounds like it was like a crappy version, like a knockoff of Body Glove, clothing or something.
And then we're gonna end
Jennifer Biel movie.
End with Piss Christ and find out where your savior is now. So enjoy. That was Piss Christ, HK, Flashpoint, Body Hammer, and Dog Day Sunrise. That was my Burton C. Bell does Head of David impression there. Pretty good stuff. So as we sort of draw things to a close with this record, one of the reasons why we wanted to do it was because, we were in different places in terms of, where we approach this record. This is probably the first time you've sat down since the mid-90s maybe that you've actually heard a majority of this record in one sitting.
Probably, yeah.
Is that fair? So now, I guess where do you kind of stand on this front after kind of like listening to it a little more than you probably have in 20 years or so?
I mean, I can understand the influence, but I still don't like it.
and that's fair, and that's why we do that stuff. It's one of those unfortunate things that some of the bands that it spawned outside of Meshuggah, because Meshuggah's not bad and they're pretty harmless.
No, they're interesting for basically a death metal. They've never gone outside of death metal.
Yeah,
they've always had screaming vocals and stuff. Like, there's nothing really safe about it.
Sure,
it's cool that they've made a career doing it. I just don't like it.
Yeah, Meshuggah's. I liked their like mid-90s kind of stuff was okay, but then like it pretty much just sounded like they were doing the same record over and over again, kind of.
Yeah, and if it's cool that they can play off time or play weird, but I'm not drawn to it.
Sure,
it's got to have some kind of something that I can grab onto.
No, and I definitely feel that, but I think that sometimes a band like Fear Factory with this record gets maligned because of the things that sort of came off of it. I was talking off mic earlier about like Helmet or Anthrax Public Enemy, accidentally maybe creating the roots of like rap metal and some of the new metal sort of signature sounds and stuff, or even the Deftones show that we did, that they get kind of like drawn into some of that stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate, and I think Fear Factory didn't do themselves any favors, because a couple records later they started to do that type of stuff with Digimortal and some of the records that I just kind of ignored them during that era. I just kind of assumed they were kind of a lost cause. Obsolete, the record after this, isn't bad, and then they're pretty much done in the water until the record I picked up not too long ago was Mechanize. That was pretty good. Gene Hoglan. It's on Candlelight Records. It's kind of a return back to the Demanufacture stuff, if you like that kind of sound.
Well, even Gene, as much of a hired gun as Gene is, usually he doesn't play in total garbage.
No.
So, there's something that gave him a little bit more, street cred or whatever. And, the GZR record, that's classic.
we were talking about some GZR. If you're unfamiliar, if you're a Burton C. Bell fan and you're unfamiliar, it's a Geezer Butler solo record with Burton C. Bell,
which you could go to any CD cutout bin in the early 2000s
and probably find it for $1. Yeah, I had it at one point in my life. I didn't have it for
Columbia
long.
House, or
probably is where I got it. BMG or something like that. Yeah. But a couple, if you like Dino Cesaris type riffing, then it's fine. It's pretty harmless, but it's not a great record. But I guess I would put this, Demanufacture in that same kind of ballpark as like a Nail Bomb, Point Blank. A record for its era that was, pretty interesting. No one had really heard anything that had the kind of technology kind of aspects kind of going on for it, and some of the weird kind of keyboard kind of things, outside of maybe Nine Inch Nails or Ministry or some of those other bands. But even they used kind of like sampling like a little bit more different than I think Fear Factory did at this point. So we're going to close things out, though, with a track called A Therapy for Pain. And it's a longer song. We'll actually kind of fade it out around the 6-minute mark, even though I think it's closer to 10 minutes. I think the roots and origins of this actually come from the pre-Soul of a New Machine era, the Obsolete kind of songs. And so it's actually a song that they had kind of been floating around for a while. But this one in particular has a very much a Typo Negative, October Rust kind production of feel style, to it. Yeah, it's just very atmospheric in that sort of sense, which is cool, And it probably hints at some of like the different things that they're going to kind of do in the future, especially vocally with Burton C. Bell. I think the song that they really hit big with was when they did the Gary Newman cover of Cars, and I can't remember if that was for an album or a soundtrack, but that was like kind of a big kind of radio song in the late 90s. But
yeah, that gave them a ton of
I just don't remember what album it was on, or I didn't really pay that much attention to it because I didn't really care, so
I remember seeing a single at the radio station or something for it, I think.
Okay.
Like a cassette single or something, or maybe I got a cassette single, I don't remember whenever that came out.
Interesting. But yeah, let us know. Kind of give us some feedbacks. You know, I'm sure there's some people that find this to be kind of a controversial record. I know you said you were kind of surprised when you saw it show up as a Hall of Fame record, you know, and stuff. And Nick Green, I know, is a big fan of it, and he kind of likes some of the weird kind of left of center stuff. I find some of my tastes with him can kind of be on. So he must have been a fan in the mid '90s, and then probably, like most of us, moved quickly away from Fear Factory into other stuff, you know. So, but yeah, you can send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. We're probably, by the time this hits, you should be able to find us on some websites, perhaps. What was the website that they were going to be able to donate on if they go to it?
We'll be on Bandcamp, but I don't have the name.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
If you'll look up Requiem Metal Podcast on Bandcamp, you'll find it.
Yeah, you'll be able to find it. You could kind of do a nice donation, which is always really helpful to us. One of the reasons that we took a couple years off is, you know, we just had to make money and do some other things, and you know, be one of the motivating factors that kind of keep us doing this a little bit more on a regular basis. And then because
the behind the scenes things that people don't see are the prep, and then editing, uploading, like all that stuff takes like way longer than you might expect. So
absolutely. And you know, the gas mileage for us to sort of drive to each other's houses. Hell, we just dropped some money on some pizza and stuff, you know.
Exactly. So. You gotta write this off.
yeah, it's a tax write-up. But we also have a Twitter account, Requiem Podcast on Twitter. You should be able to find that out. That's an easy way to give us some kind of direct feedback. Let us know what shows you're kind of interested in doing. Let us know where you stand on an album like Demanufacture. You know, like I said, even though Mark kind of checked it out, it didn't change his opinion, which is fine. You know, we're like that. We have kind of varied tastes, and I'm very, very aware of where this stuff falls in, like, it was a very niche kind of mid-90s Roadrunner right before the wheels came off of American metal. I mean, this is like right at the cusp of like the Korn revolution and all the sort of aftermath and waves that Limp Bizkit and all that stuff were going to sort of create. It was the calm before the storm, but you guys had already left the storm and the calm.
Yeah, we left the state and the storm was way behind us.
So I get it. So I'm sure there's some other people that are in that realm. But so Therapy for Pain from Demanufacture, Fear Factory. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
No death tonight.